Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jamie. I'm the Director of Operations at Women and Children First Bookstore in Chicago. I'm so glad you've all taken time out this evening to join me in welcoming Yoon Choi in conversation with Nathan Englander to talk about Yoon's story collection, Skinship, which I have right here. It's a lovely book. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in taking a moment to acknowledge that the land upon which the bookstore stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. Thank you. I am really happy to say that our bookstore is open for browsing, and you can also support us through our online store. We offer curbside pickup, and we ship to anywhere in the U.S. Our upcoming events will continue to be held virtually on Crowdcast while Delta, rears its head. And we encourage you to check out our website for our event calendar for our free events, and also links to our upcoming ticketed events with authors like Ana Castillo, Samira Ahmed, and Anita Hill. Some logistical Crowdcast information you might need to know. During the event, if you have a question for either of our authors, you can use the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of your screen. We prefer that you do that there instead of doing it in the chat, just because it's easier for Nathan and Yoon to see. You can also utilize the chat bar to talk to one another. You can also buy a copy of Skinship by checking the Buy the Book box. It is a beautiful package. With that housekeeping out of the way, let's turn our attention to our authors. Yoon Choi was born in Korea and lives with her husband and 4 children in Anaheim, California. Her stories and essays have appeared in New England Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, Narrative Magazine, and the Best American Short Stories. She is joined tonight in conversation by Nathan Englander. He's the author of The Dinner at the Center of the Earth and the collection What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank, among other works of fiction. He was the 2012 recipient of the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award and a finalist for the 2013 Pulitzer Prize. Yoon Choi's debut book, Skinship, is a deeply intelligent, meditative collection of stories. I found myself reading one story a day, drifting off into the worlds she creates in 30-page bites. The Korean Americans at the center of these stories are at differing times angry, striving, mourning, melancholy, joyful. In other words, they're deeply human. I'm so excited to be here with all of you tonight to hear her talk about this beautifully written book. Thanks again so much, and now I'll turn the virtual stage over to Yoon Choi and Nathan Englander. Thank you.
Hey, Yoon, how are you?
I'm good, Nathan. How are you?
Good. So happy to be doing this. Hi, everyone out there. Hey, Mom. She comes to everything. I love this book so much. I have a million things to say, but everybody wants to. Also, we were talking about kids in the green room. I'm in a loner apartment, so you don't have to hear bedtime. If a dog barks, it's a smaller dog than my dog. It's a different dog and a different painting. And I can see you're a huge sports fan. This must be your bedroom. Anyway, so yes, to the audience or to you, I guess it's so nice to meet you, but yes, someone sent me this book. I love these stories so much. It's just so extraordinarily it's just a magnificent, it is a perfect collection. It's just so polished and careful yet easy. It's just smooth and poetry. Honestly, I just care about characters, and as I say on the back in my short blurb, but it's going to be with me for this book will be fan for life, and these stories will stay with me forever. I just love these worlds, these characters, and maybe you and I, if we have time at the end, which I know we won't because I have 8 pages of questions on the first story alone and then another 900 questions, but we could talk about the making of collections too at the end. But I just also love a collection's not supposed to be weaker than a novel or an alternate form. It has to, the same as chapters linking. There's such a beautiful shape to this collection, which I also love. It really, I'll ask you about that later if there's time, but it really has the shape from birth to death, and it's magnificent. Anyway, but before we dig in, I just also, as a forever reader and a forever attendee of these events, certain stories and certain writers, I just know when they're voice driven, I hear them Tim O'Brien or Lori Moore. There's all these people I've heard read over the years, Tobias Wolff, like who just, once I hear them read, their voice is in my head for their work forever. Is there a page you could read us just so people could hear your voice, and then I will fully pepper you with questions?
Sure. But first, I need to say thank you so much, Nathan, for doing this. I have been a fan of your stories for such a long time, and having you here is like a weird dream come true. So
Yeah,
thank
it's
you. Thank
mutual.
you so much. Thank you for
It's
your
mutual.
books, which I also have
My
here.
pleasure. I hope it's in person next time. There you go.
Okay, so I will read my page, which I have prepared here. And I think I'll just read the first page of the title story, which is Skinship, so it won't require much introduction. Skinship. One morning in Korea, my brother Jiho and I put on our burgundy felt blazers and pretended to go to school. We joined the other children walking with bouncing book bags to the main road, past the shuttered restaurants with menu offerings painted on their windows, knife noodles, blood sausage, ox bone soup, and the vacant lot with the 2 caged dogs. Mothers leaned out of windows calling instructions to their children. Shop owners began to lift tarps from their wares and raise dust with their dense bamboo brooms. A pushcart wheeled forward. We heard a two-tone whistle at our backs and turned to see our father, with his jacket collar turned up and his hands in his pockets. "See ya later," he said in his charismatic English as he strode past. He was so good-looking. Grandmas in crowded places, the bus, the market, were always rapping on his arm to tell him that. I slowed down to see which way our father would turn on the main road, right or left. He turned left. That meant he was going to work and would not return for many hours. Grabbing Chiho by the hand, I dragged him with me back the way we'd come, against a current of schoolmates who turned in surprise and called, "Toyona, Chioya, what's up? What did you forget?" At the apartment, I caught my breath and called for our mother. She emerged from the kitchen. "Did he go to work?" He did.
Thank you. Yay. I clap for all of us. I will come back to this story later. We will get, but just, yeah, one second thing that's like on page, I wouldn't have to tell everyone where it is in my questions. It's called having a live event. Anyway, but yes, as long as you started with Skinship, do you want to talk about that word or that title or its meaning, is the origin? I was Googling around if it's, anyway, but yes, would you talk about just Skinship as a title choice and what the word like truly means? Or
So I don't know that I know what it truly means. I only know how
I mean the way it's, yes.
Yeah, I personally grew up with the word, which is a little bit
Yes.
different from the way it might be used culturally.
Yes.
So my mom used to use the word skinship a lot. And it's this hybrid word, and people say it might be skin plus kinship or skin plus friendship, skin plus relationship, whatever that hybrid is. And it's that feeling of physical but non-sexual intimacy that you can feel towards like your child or a lot of times in Korea, school children will hold hands just as a friendly gesture. Or, in K-pop bands, you can see a lot of times with the boy bands, they're very like physically affectionate with one another. All of that like skin intimacy is what skinship is. The reason it's the title of my book is because my good friend told me that that's what it should be. And then my agent said one-word titles are good. So that's why.
Yes. Again, I also want to think about all that stuff, which is just, yes, such a fun part of the end of a collection where like, I finished, now we can talk about titles with friends. Anyway, the $1 million questions to really start off, which is, it just matters now. Like, how are you? How are you holding up? How are you and your family doing in all this? How was your?
I know. It's crazy, huh? And it keeps going. I thought it was over and it continues on. So
Yes,
I have 2 kids.
yeah.
They are 12, 10, 8, and 6. And so, it's challenging. And I think for me, it was how shall I put it? Like, it was especially challenging not having my space and time to do what I felt I wanted to do. At the same time, I wanted to be deeply appreciative of this time that I had with my kids. So, it was like a balance. Although, I mean, we didn't have it as bad as people can have it. We have a house, our kids were in and out of school. At times they were Zooming. Um, we have like a driveway where they play basketball. Um, so in those small
Yeah.
ways, it was doable, you know?
Yeah, that's huge. Yes. I was going to say, like, I answer everything with, like, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful. But that's it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm super with you. Like, you must be, yeah, deeply thankful if you have a roof over your head and food on. Like, this is,
Yeah.
or just health. This is such an intense time. But we're here as writers, and that's a very strange thing, which is, why I ask. I did an event, like, it was Salman Rushdie has a book of essays out, and I did an event with him last month for his book. But it made me not happy because it's not Schadenfreude, and I want him to be working. I like to read what he writes, but more like a comfort that someone who's, he's a grandpa now, his kids are grown, his time is his own. And I'm very interested in this notion of, like, working now as writers, like true and unrelated, like this idea you can blame it on all these things, that it's impossible to work during a moment like this sometimes. But I was it was comforting to hear that he just couldn't write for a long time because it was too sad, because the world's always sad, but just so much, loss and chaos and, all of that. I was like, oh, that is enough for what we do, to not be on solid ground as everything is unknown and so dark. Anyway, or there's no anyway off of that. But yes, I guess, yeah. So have you've been chipping away during this? You have gotten some work done, or it's more family time?
I have been chipping. I don't know exactly what I've got, but
yes,
I'm chipping away.
That's lovely to hear. Back to, I always tell my students, and you talk about, having kids. My oldest is the age of your youngest, so you seem like giants to me. But I guess I just want to hear about the process of this book, because I already screamed it in my introduction. Like, it's just, I teach I'm on faculty at NYU, and I talk to my grad students all the time. Like, everybody just wants a debut book, And I was like, do you need to be famous for he was 22 and that was the most horrendous debut of all, like, to be famous for the worst debut? People often want to rush out these uncooked, half-cooked books. And I was like, there is only one debut. Like, why not? This book is it's perfect. It's so beautiful. So I guess I wanted to hear about how long you've been working on these stories, or parenting and writing, or getting it right before you putting it out in the world, or, how the experience of, being a parent or family. These are such family-based stories. I can't even tell you how perfectly drawn the grandparents are, the parents, the children. Like, you can do any age, which is a separate question, which I want to ask about. But yes, how long have you been working on these stories? What was the process of deciding you were done? I can tell you're a rewriter, that's for sure. So yes, when did you start this book, and, how did you know when it was finished?
So I went to grad school right after college, so I was very young. And I did like an MA program, which turned into an MFA program at Hopkins. At the time, it was a year. And after I left, and during that time, I found it really, really difficult to write anything. And I think it was just because, just to put it simply, I didn't have my subject matter. Because one thing I really, really didn't want to do was be that Asian writer. And it seemed like my options were limited at the time. And so that was in my early 20s. I left that program and I did a whole bunch of stuff related to, not really having a profession, but not, like what the English major does, right? So I got like a master's in English lit. I went to law school for a month. I taught English overseas. And then I got married. I got married and to a guy in California, which is another place I thought I'd never be. I'm from New York, and I'm from Long Island, actually. I know you're also from
What?
Island.
Yes. What town? What exit on the southern state? Dix Hills. Oh, nice. Yeah.
right in Suffolk County. Yeah, so
Yes.
now here I am in California, married, and then we have 4 kids in 5 years. So I know their ages right now are 2 years apart, but it's actually like 18 months-ish. So we have
Yeah,
4
yeah.
kids in 5 years, and like that's my life, for a while. Um, and then after my 4th, Andrew was born, about a year in, I started writing again. And the writing had completely changed. Part of it by necessity, I think, because it was late, I'm tired, I don't have time to be so hard on myself about everything. Um, and also, I think it was odd, but I wrote about a Korean character. Like I named him and I gave him a Korean name. And that was the first time, really, like thinking back, that I named a character a Korean name, but I don't know why I thought I couldn't do that before. Um, and that story was my Stegner application for Stanford. And
Yes.
then I wrote these stories throughout the fellowship program. Without that fellowship, I wouldn't have written them. It was like the deadline, the community, like the sacrifices my family was making to make sure I could, I was commuting to Stanford basically, from Orange County. And so,
Oh,
yeah, the
wow.
book,
That's a
yeah.
commute.
I mean, but it's like a 1 hour plane ride from the
Yeah,
Orange
yeah.
County Airport, so it's not so bad. But it's just, my kids were much younger at that time too, um, and so yeah, those were the years that I wrote the bulk of the stories, and it was so nice, like being back in a writers community after having been with all
Yeah.
these suburban housewives, who I also love, but it was just like,
Yes.
and yeah, and then those were the stories. I met my agent through a professor there, and
Yeah.
here we are.
Um, first of all, it's such a great, I have some friends who did the Stagner and everybody loves it. And I'm a product of an MFA. Like it really did change my life, like that community. I can't even tell you when you're starting out in your stories. I agree with you. Like it's both for me, like more pressure than I ever could have imagined. And then more community that I ever, like it just,
Yeah.
those people are still my people 100 years later. So anyway, yes, so nice. But I love what you're saying because I'm a huge like Grace Paley fan and Penelope Fitzgerald. Like it doesn't matter when you cook, or Kent Howard, like Plain Song is such a beautiful book. Like he just sat there and wrote every day. And I think he got his MFA really young and just, just at, I don't know, whatever it was, 50 something, which, when I was 30 seemed like 100, but not anymore. But anyway, but like nonetheless, like I love this idea. Thank you for sharing that because I feel like there's always writers listening and everyone thinks it's supposed to be on some sort of clock, and there's what you want is beautiful work and you want it to just happen how it's supposed to happen. And also I have 9 million questions that I didn't think I'd get to on that either. But when you said I didn't want to be that Asian writer, now I definitely want to go down that route because Asian is large. Like you already, it's so, really have 900 very delicately. I was trying to ask it right on that front. But when you said I gave a character a Korean name, so now 50 questions. Because also there's this thing, I'm so old. I ask my agents all the time, I'm like, am I a man of letters yet? And she's like, not yet. But I'm old enough that my first students are now old. But my student Jay Kang writes beautifully. He wrote this gorgeous piece in the New York Times Magazine about this student who died in getting hazed at an Asian fraternity. But he was also just talking about this American idea of just individual identities and cultures and countries and turning in America to this thing. And that you said, I didn't want to be that. So yeah, I guess I'll just flip to Jews. That's where I'm comfortable. This woman stopped me the other day. She must have been 82 or 85, which makes her probably my youngest reader aside from you. You bring it down even further since you have a book. But she was like, you're not embarrassed of your tribe. And that meant a lot to me. But I don't write Jewish stories. Like it was so meaningful to me that she's like, you tell the Jewish, like, you're not like the tribe. Point is, I guess I want to hear about that name popping into your head and know what you're writing or how you identify. And then I'll ask a question about publishing a book. The point is, I've never written a Jewish story in my life. I just tell stories and the whole world's Jewish to me. Like, that's all. Mm-hmm. I understand when readers are like, these are very Jewish. I'm like, I guess so. But, I just write about people. So yes, I really want to hear about this name popping into your head. And could you unpack that for me, what that meant? If you were thinking about community, if you were just a certain version of yourself popped into your head, like I would love for you to address the broader idea of Asian American fiction, and then to yours, to that Korean name popping into your head. That's giant to me.
So I think that in thinking I didn't want to be that Asian writer in my early 20s, I was being kind of short-sighted, right? And I wasn't really forging for myself what that would mean. But also, I grew up with a certain bookshelf, which my parents provided for me. It was like the great books of Western literature, all shrink wrapped on my bookshelf. And there was nothing
Yes.
there that had an Asian name on it, or
Wow.
if someone said, oh, you're in a writing workshop, the first question everybody would ask me is, do you want to be Amy Tan? So my knee-jerk reaction was always, no, I don't want to be Amy Tan. And I read her books again later on. I was like, oh, Amy Tan is wonderful. But at the time, I just had a very strong reaction, not wanting to be categorized by someone who is also Chinese, not Korean, right? So there's
I was headed there. I was like, one thing I know about Amy is she's Chinese.
So, and I would do things like look at phone books to figure out like a European sounding name, or like a generically, like I just couldn't figure it out. And looking back, I'm like, well, it wasn't a difficult jump to make, and yet it seemed an impossible jump. And I think the world has also been changing since that time, where there are much more examples, like readily available examples of writers who are writing immigrant fiction that doesn't feel, precious or whatever that I was objecting to.
Yes.
A huge influence for me during the time when I wasn't writing was Interpreter of Maladies by Junpa Lahiri.
Yes.
Because I felt that her writing was familiar writing about an unfamiliar culture, so I could appreciate in the insights and the characteristics of these people. Like there was something so deeply recognizable about them. And there was nothing that was so like foreign or weird, Yeah. And yet she was writing about a deeply specific culture. And that kind of opened up possibilities for me, I think. And so, yeah, I don't know why when I returned to writing, I used a Korean man's name. But I did have an issue, and I wrote a short piece about this, like a little essay, but I always felt like, Korean names are very uninteresting in that there aren't very many options. They're almost always 3 syllables, siblings often share a syllable. There's many things about it that just make them kind of clunky when you write. And then there's like the issues of whether you're going to hyphenate or capitalize. And just when you look at them on the page, it already like gave me this like nervous jolt, like how am I going to handle this material? And so, yeah, I don't know. I gave the guy a name. I think it's Han Mose. I actually might be misremembering that at this point, but, and the story kind of, because he had a specifically Korean name, he began to have like a Korean wife and a Korean past. And I just, like the story just kind of unfolded for me from there.
Yeah. Oh, that super speaks to me. And now I want to talk about this for an hour, but I will spare, maybe we'll talk about it differently. Because I think you're right. It's like how you've read, and also that workshop experience, like this notion where I felt like, oh, I'm writing, you go out and have pizza and beer, and then people write these stories about pizza and beer. And I'm like, I don't know how to write these stories. I felt like such a weirdo, and then I was like, oh, that weirdo is what makes a different book, but yes, I super agree with you. And you have to be in the vein of, you get passed down. It is both complimentary to be listed with your heroes. And then also, yes, it's this idea that you're supposed to fit in. Anyway, you're speaking the gospel. But then on that, but I also think that's nice moments of like when you talk about, Junpa's writing, but this notion of owning a universe, like I love, like we all read, I always say, like, you know, the example I love to use is Cormac McCarthy. I love those books. Like, a horse is a big dog to me. I assume horse people have a different experience with those, you know, what do I know? So, you know, and I love the Russians, and like they'll put in, I don't speak French, you know, like they'll put in, you know, a whole paragraph in French, and I'm like, I just feel it. So and I love that you have a line in Korean characters in the middle of the book. Like, I love that kind of ownership where it's like, I don't have access to that. I'm not missing anything. I'm experiencing it the way I'm supposed to. And I love those moments of like, you know, they're so quiet, but they're like, they just own a world. You know what I'm saying? We all don't have access to specific, like I go to the dictionary, just the way you go to a dictionary. But I love that choice. Did you think a lot about that choice?
You mean specifically about the Korean in the?
Yeah, about that one line. Yes.
So actually, I had it written out phonetically until much later. And then I was just like, you know, I'm just going to do it in Korean and see what they say. And actually, Knopf said nothing negative about it. They just were like, is the spelling correct? I was like, I hope so. And then they just
Yes.
published it that way.
Oh, but I'm so glad to hear also, again, to the writers listening, but I love those choices that, like, for drafts and drafts, it's in like it's yeah, it looks perfect. That, you know, to me, that was like yes, I love that moment for me where I'm like, this is to be experienced in a specific way consciously. Anyway, that's wonderful. Oh, and just one more thing about community, and then I guess I'll switch off. But the Church of Abundant Life, the first story, which is wonderful. Just that idea of also even the idea of representing community, and then we'll really switch. But we ended up here. Oh, I just am very interested. It's like page 4 already, where the front door bangs open and a man wakes his way to the register, telestially says, and Sue goes behind the counter to unhook a calling card, which hangs on a pegboard beside the 3-pack condoms. Puerto Rican, she thinks automatically. It is such a loaded moment now of like culture, ethnicity, tension, how we say, how we represent. Like, did you feel any representational weight to just even be true to a notion of a character who thinks like, now I am serving a Black person, now I have a Puerto Rican customer? Was that in your head at all as static or responsibility or, you know, representational truths of community? I wrestle with that a lot. The dirty laundry that, you know, like this idea of like people are mad or not mad, where I'm like, painting real people is painting real people. Like, so yeah, I really wanted to ask that.
I do think it's a delicate line, but maybe it's not necessarily a delicate aesthetic line, more
Yes.
like, you know, more like a politically of the times. I also wrestle with it. I'm not sure. But in terms of the character, I know, and I can only speak for the Koreans that I know, but I know that Koreans can be pretty racist and in very discriminating ways. You know, there are different levels of Asians that are spoken of in different ways, you know, or Puerto Rican versus Mexican, they have like their own prejudices and biases based on those experiences. Korean and Black interaction is so charged. And I did an event with Steph Cha, who wrote about the event that led up to the Rodney King incident. Like, she fictionalized it, and she's so brave to do that. I don't think that I would, especially now, venture into that territory and open myself up to saying something more than I'm saying. And I think, you know, what I'm saying is it's fiction that I'm writing. And what I want to depict is a character. And I think characters are racist at times, you know, they're not politically correct. They're, you know, and I did feel that I wanted to capture that.
Yes. Oh, you did. And I mean, I've been saying this about Roth for 1,000 years, where Jews were freaking out. You know, he got Gershom Scholem, was it? Yeah, who's like, you're going to make another Holocaust. But I was like, more people around the world let Jews into their home and understood they're human beings. I was like, we don't kill people that we see as human or dimensional. Like, I think, yes, I 1,000% agree with you. Painting that humanity, like, you read for character, not for, you have a whole separate issue if every character is everybody. That's a problem. I have really more questions on this front, but I better switch off. Oh, the Church of Abundant Life. I have two questions. Have you been to a revival? Did you? I have so many questions about research in this book, but like yes. Let's
Yes.
start with that.
I've been to revivals. When I was sitting with Chang-Yi Lee, I was like, have you been to a revival? He's like, oh, I've been to a revival. And when you're Korean American, chances are you've been to a revival. And they're all pretty similar.
Yeah, well, it's drawn. Now I have been to a revival thanks to that story. Oh, and I guess I want to ask about story length. And I saw someone lovingly, was it Adam Johnson, but comparing you to Alice Munro, which is a great comparison. But I love the breadth of these stories. They're almost like, they feel like, I don't know if there's a category of fat story or short novella. And we change it if we like a book, like what is that one? Old Man in the Sea, Hemingway's thing. I believe that's a short that they call as a novel. It's like an 8-word book, and they're like, it's a novel now because we like it. But your stories are some of them are so wonderfully long. They're really almost novella. And through you, back to you starting out this talk saying, and then a friend said this, and my agent said I could have that title. It's so hard to just do your work and not think about what's going to happen in the world. But were you aware that your agent would be like, I can't send out a 32,000 word story. It'll have to just stay in the book. Were you thinking about length at all, or were they longer or shorter? Like they all just happen this way?
Well, I kept trying to write a short one. My goal was 16 pages. Never happened. Yes. And my agent is great. She has never once asked me to shorten it, or she can't sell it, or she just kind of took it as it was. And I don't know. I think that Alice Munro spoiled us in writing these stories, and we, like, when you're used to that like meal feeling after that length of story, sometimes a real short, like a short story can be short. So that might have been like in my palette, but
yes. And also, are you, maybe this will be unanswerable, but obviously I just feel like you have such a relationship to rhythm or I mean, the end, like, can I read? I don't think it's going to ruin the story for anyone if I read the last line. Is that upsetting to you?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I'm just saying there's people who can write endings. I always say it looks like I won't ever say a bad word publicly about anyone's work. I'm very critical inside of some books, and then I won't say that. I just read a book that could have been so perfect. I was like, if only you'd taken the time to write the endings. Anyway, but the point is, there are things that will have to be done tomorrow to compensate for today, inventory that we'll have to make, money that will have to be counted, items that will have to be stocked, milk, she thinks as she thinks about tomorrow, bread. It's poetry. So do you read out loud? Do you love poetry? Like, these are so rhythmic, which is what I care about with short story. Your novel also better be rhythmic, everyone who's writing novels, but nonetheless, like a short story, you can really feel the rhythms. And these have such perfect, like, you stick the landings on every single story in the collection, so like rhythmically. How torturous was it to come to the ending? Or do you read out loud when you're composing? Those don't happen by accident, or even with a lot of help. They just take infinite work.
So I know I should read out loud. I've been told that a lot, and I try, but the stories are long and it gets boring, and I don't read out loud a lot. I get really self-conscious about hearing my voice, and so I don't do that. The endings are not difficult for me. They just kind of, when I'm there, I know that it's there.
Yes.
But getting there, the beginnings are very difficult for me. So by the time I've revised the beginning, like however many times, and I've gotten to the end, it gets to be a little bit like mystical feeling in that the pieces just kind of fall together. But in that, all of that stuff has been done before, in your subconscious and in your work.
You're Anyway, back to revivals. Now I'm just going to start screaming hallelujah as you're saying this. But thank you. I was like, as I wrote that question, I'm like, I don't know if this is answerable or is going to make sense to anyone, mainly to you who needs to answer it. But thank you. That's so helpful to me. Or like, I'm super into dissociative states in the subconscious. And like, I just feel like you talk to a writer and they either, yes, different brains work different ways that make super sense to me. Like sometimes some people just write, I'll sometimes just be writing towards the last line and have no idea how I'll ever get there, or you hear the beginning. But thank you. That really, hope it makes sense to you at home. But to me, that's really useful and interesting. Oh, re-first language. We're going to run out of time. I have a million questions. Re-first language. What about the choice? That's written in like a dialect. English is a second language voice. And I thought that was a so fantastical thing to execute. How hard was that to build, or the choice to write in that?
Yeah, so I had written that beginning in a different voice before, in a fluent English voice, and I just couldn't figure out where this couple was driving to until I changed the voice. And the reason I changed the voice is my daughter's best friend, Emily.
Yes.
My daughter's Emma. She's Emily. Byun,
Yeah.
she's Korean.
Yeah.
Her mother, who is not a fluent English speaker, we text and whatever. We've known each other for a while. And Emily told me one day that all the time her mother's been texting me, Emily, has been writing the texts, or at least editing them, because her mom is so nervous about her English not being perfect.
Right.
Even though she's lived here for like 20 years. That was my key. Like I thought. Like I could hear that voice. Like, where is the hesitation or you were talking about rhythm, the rhythm of the person who's actually communicating very well, and yet there are these glitches in their communication. And so I began to hear her, and that sort of unlocked a lot of the story for me.
Oh, that gives me a little chill. First day of school on our end, fingers crossed, like I may get to be a writer again after, I wish I'd chosen, would have been nicer to be like, I'm going to just sail around the world for a year and a half. But we did it differently. Oh, but the point is, if I get to work again, but it's so nice. It's just comforting for me to hear those things, because I read that, I'm like, this feels like this must have happened at a moment, that voice. And it's thrilling to me to hear there's that draft, the wonderful writer Chris Adrian, who's a dear old friend. I love his work, but I read his roughs. I'll be reading a 1,000-page novel and it'll suddenly say like I on page 700 of a 1,000-page draft. And I'll be like, in a third person book, I'll be like, did you write this book first in first person? And be like, yeah, I changed. Anyway, but like, it's so good for people to hear, for me to be reminded, like that notion that you're working, like it's just, everything you're talking about tonight hits that gut moment where you're like, it's just something's wrong. And there really is like a lock and a key to when these stories find their form. And that's such a moving one, that little text thing, like a person being, shy or nervous in front of you, and a friend, Back to friends and relationships. Let's go to Map of the Simplified World. But Anjali Anand and Jiwan Lee, her a friend who shows up in class from India. But I feel like the whole book is, whether it's like a different kind of husband, or the pastor popping up, or, a child of another relationship. I feel like every story I feel like is people who are like inextricably linked, but also like different, have this, there's people like Yoon together and choosing each other and relying on each other. And then these giant barriers. I feel like that runs through almost every story. That's like an especially clear, the opening starts that way. But yeah, were you at all conscious of, the nice thing about reading a book is you do your work and then I come up with 1,000 theories. You'll be like, I guess that's my theory now. I guess it's intentional, but it really runs through everything. Were you aware of that? Like, to use Dr. Dolittle, that push me, pull you structure of this book, where I feel like people are like in love, but stuck together, or, just family, every kind of bond holds them together, but they're all, there's this great tension in everything, pulled together and torn apart in every story.
Yeah, no, that one was, I wasn't conscious of that in any of those kinds of words. But I do think that immigrant families in particular have this thing where you're stuck on you're stuck with your family, and there is like a closeness to that, and yet there's also the longing to leave the family, um, and also like the fact that you do leave the family, like the children are encouraged to leave with one hand, we're like given every
Yes.
opportunity to leave, like pushed out into the success of the world, and yet also held back, right? So I definitely think that um, theme is probably in there, but it wasn't as conscious as you made it.
Yes, yes, yes. It's very conscious. I was just, yes, I love it. I was like, again, well, so we're going to take questions. So there's some things I'll be so mad if I don't get to ask. So, a couple of them. Oh, it's this, however, I won't even make this a question. If you want to address it, you can. I'll jump to it. But, in Solo Works for Piano, it's so hard to write about sex. And for those of you also watching, there's a bad sex award that gets given out. So when friends write, you can write it's not only nervous and hard to write a sex scene, but you may, they really give this award every year. They give it to prominent, they'll be like Murakami wins, they give it to good people, but it is a nervous making thing. But oh, yes, but this story has the most awkward sex scene, and it's so beautifully, it feels so real, and it's a masterpiece of awkward fooling around in this story, but in their young time. But you just you just draw, again, your people are just amazing. But we have Albert and I guess Elisa have autism spectrum disorder, as I'm guessing from reading it at home. But it's the point of view in that story is just magnificent. I don't know, do you want to talk about building that story back to things that are nervous making to touch, or that you really, you really better pull it off if you're going to do that? And to this reader, it was just magnificent. But do you want to talk about that story, or set it up for people, or address it, any part of it, or we can just move on also?
No, I'll talk about, I have a very clear memory in a draft that I'd submitted in workshop of that story. Elizabeth Talent, who is my professor during that particular workshop cycle, said something like, if you're going to do it, like, just do it. Or if you're going to go there, just go there. And so I added a few extra sentences. I'm not exactly sure which scene, like there's more than one, I think, that you might be talking about. But anyway, I did add a few sentences after her, after reading her comments. Yeah, I think that's it I have.
That's well, I guess, no, you truly, that is the point, which is like, I felt like you really went there, and that's what makes it work. So it's lovely to hear. Just another important thing, which is having readers, whether they're professors or friends or your editor or agent, who's going to tell you, like, I see what you're trying to do, now do it. So that's sometimes the best advice, But yes, I really want, by the way, everyone, I don't know if there are questions there already, but I'm going to leave time for questions in a couple of minutes. I'll really just ask a couple of more, but yes, this is the time to type them, and then I will ask them to Yoon for you. But this is a dumb one, but I want to ask this too, but then I'll ask my big one, or just important to my heart. But in the loved ones, you quote Bruce Springsteen's Thunder Road, and that takes permissions. I really wanted to know if Bruce Springsteen's people were nice about permissions, because I was going to say, if your editor's like, could you just, same story, but could you end with a line from Meatloaf? Point is, the story ends with a Bruce Springsteen lyric. So yes, you're like, we can get Whitesnake for cheap. But were they nice about letting you use Springsteen lyrics?
So that story was first published in Narrative magazine, and at that time, the editor did ask if I had a different song or whatever. I particularly wanted that one in there, and so she contacted Bruce Springsteen's people, and they said that I could use it, but I have to write a check, and so that's fine, $100, right? But the weird part was turning it into a personal check made out to Bruce Springsteen, which I then mailed to his lawyers, and then we had the permission to use it.
Yes.
So, I don't know.
Yes.
We have
it makes the story at least $100 better, so I think a fair deal. I think you made money. And okay, this is the, I'm not trying to, I do not have, I really love all these stories. I love them equally, but I'm kind of super in love with Mose and the art of losing. So I don't know if you, like, that is just a tour de force, my friend. Like, he's just magnificent, caring. Yeah. Would you say, yes, as a last thing, I really have more questions, but maybe people won't ask that many, and I'll sneak in some more of mine, or I'll pretend they're. This sounds from Cheryl in Bergen County. Yeah, there we go. I'll practice. I'll make it up. Anyway, but oh yes, would you set up that story and then talk about building Mose? Because he's just, I truly, like, I know him, I see him. It's such a hard character to draw. It's so empathetic. He's so, it's so quiet but so tense. If he's watching his grandson, like, your nerves in this story, it's just a masterpiece of a story. So yes, if you'd set it up and maybe talk about that character, and then we'll take questions.
So I think that a lot of different things came together in that particular story. One is, I think as parents, especially when you have younger kids, you always are a little bit nervous about the person who's watching your child, and maybe not watching them quite the way that you would prefer for them to watch your child.
Yes.
Like that low key anxiety was there much more when my kids were younger, and I'm sure that fed into it. My father is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so the fact that, and the idea of memory, I think, is just very um, fitting for short stories. Short stories are often about time and the element of just memory, immigrant stories, and just, I think that all kind of came together, especially because Korean immigrants of a certain generation all have that weird, like, disjunct between what they'd experienced in Korea and, like, war or the aftermath of the war, and a certain, like, real poverty, and then this sense of, like, America being a very different place. That sense of, like, just juncture, I think, is or disjuncture is very common in that generation.
Yeah.
And then I think that character is not uncommon. There are many Korean men who served in the army and sang those songs and said those slang words, and are now grandpas watching their
Right.
their watching their grandchildren in someone's house.
Yeah.
So I think those were kind of all the things that came together for that one.
It's such a loving, yeah. I'm pretty obsessed with that character. It's just so beautiful. I'm going to open the questions. No one's asked one yet. All right. That's good for me. Oh, then, so you end on song and song. Again, don't be shy, everyone. If you do have questions, I'm that person who just forms it in my head and then doesn't ask it. But, you end on the last story, which I was so interested, back to the relationship question of this book and the America question of this book. Was there something about ending a book that's so about coming to America and, moving it abroad? I thought that was such an interesting closing space. Again, maybe it's not conscious at all. Maybe it's that gut thing where I thought that was such a wonderful place to, like, push us out of America and put these two sisters abroad. And even that last line, where it's talking about lies and truth at the end of a story collection, it was just such a smart place to close. Was that a conscious choice, or did you?
No, that was my editor. I actually had, she, so my agent did one thing to change the order of the collection before we sent it out.
Yes.
And then my editor was like, why don't we move this one to the end? And it made sense to me. I just trusted her. The one I had at the end was The Loved Ones, because I was doing it sort of chronologically, where I started with the youngest. Right. And I moved to the oldest, and she was like, maybe you want to put this other one there. And I just, trusted it. After a while, I think it's hard for you to actually see what the experience of the collection is in order, like, you put them there, and it's also familiar to you that it doesn't really communicate like a reader would read it, so. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's so, First of all, like I love those moments when the book, I think I already said tonight, but that's like my favorite day where it's like, I'm at work. What's your job today? I'm just going to line these completely polished stories up. There's a day's work for me. But yeah, I just really do love that moment. But that's the idea of like having trusted people, like you know yourself and you make these decisions. Just you're like, as you said with that other story, like this isn't the right voice for it. And then it just clicks. So I love those, those other brains that come in and just like, it does have that age shape in the book, but I thought it was the perfect, hats off to your editor, but that's like the perfect story to end this book on. While I look at the questions, I see questions now. Oh, you're out again. It's different than being a rock star. I think writers, it's really nice because you can have a really nice career. I've been with like the world's most famous like writers, like people don't even pay attention. It's not like walking around when you walk around like a movie star. You know what I'm saying? It's just very nice. But anyway, but you are a public person now. Like, are you liking being out in public? Do you feel like you're getting weird questions? Are you enjoying this? The being out there?
Yeah. Well, I'm very grateful for the book being out there and all the efforts to put it out, and for the people who read it and who say like meaningful things about it. I had one, I did a little talk at a Stanford class, and one of the girls was like, "Oh, I read your book, and then I called my mom and said I loved her." I was like, "Oh,
Oh my God, that's the best. Isn't that worth
yeah."
going
I
out
was
there?
like, "Well,
That's
I should be able
amazing.
to do that to myself with my mother," but here. So,
Yes.
yes, I love that. I'm not a public person. I'm not like private per se, but like I think that writers, it's important for us not to have too many voices in our head, like telling us what we
I
do well and what we don't do well. And so,
super with you.
yeah.
Honestly, I like skip that question. I read this book, All the Frequent Troubles of Our Days. I'm a really great nonfiction book. It means I'm getting my brain back. I can read about Rebecca Donner, but it was this guy, Rudolf Ditzen. He had to please Hitler. He's like, I want to be lefty still, but I got to please. He had a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized. And I was like, what a nice Hitlerian lesson about writers, like about keeping the voices out of. I was like, this is how you end up in an institution. Like, I want to be me, but also make Hitler happy. It's not that easy. Not that easy a balance. Two quick questions. From Kevin Yoon, do you have a favorite story in this collection? And if so, why is it your favorite or perhaps a favorite character? Please say Mose. Anyway, no. Yes.
I'm not going to say Mose. I'm going to
No,
say,
no, that's my favorite.
I don't really have a favorite, but I have said this before. I think the one who sounds closest to me, like my sensibilities, would be the narrator of Song and Song. I think that in her, like, slight pissiness and whatever, and her husband
Yeah, yeah.
looking at his game scores, like that's a real life personal detail. um, so,
That's funny.
so she does feel pretty easy. She was pretty easy for me to. She was not a struggle for me to imagine. Um, yeah, I don't think I have a
Uh,
favorite story. I do have a least favorite, but I actually don't think I'm gonna reveal that.
no, do not. I will. Yes. I do not have a least favorite. In the loved ones, final question, a quick answer, and then they'll pull the plug on us. And I don't know what. Tell us what the next event is at Women and Children. In the loved ones, you have 2 pages from the point of view of the patient, and the rest of the story is from the young aide. This is a good question. I should have had this in mind. Can you talk about that choice, since it's the only story that has 2 different points of view that I can remember?
So the original The Loved Ones had a different name, and it had a much more back and forth between, there was the old man's perspective and then the nurse's aide's perspective. Um, and like toggling between those points of view, I got to the ending and I came up with what I thought was a pretty cool ending, where the 2 points of view sort of align and there's this sort of like coincidence. And I thought this is great. This is really clever. Um, and then my editor was like, do you want to rethink this story? And it was a little hard for me to do that because I thought that ending was so clever, in which like the 2 points of view are like
Yes.
coinciding, and it's great. And it's like, I was like, this is like, the bridge is like falling, but he's dying, but at the same time, and she was like, rethink this one. And as I rethought it, I kind of put that voice of the dying man more towards the front, because I felt that his unknowability was really part of the story, and the relationships between the aide and the nurse was a more important part of the story. So I did it. I cut it, and I felt better after
Yes.
doing that.
That makes so much sense. And I also love you perfectly highlight the editor, the careful editor and writer. Do you want to rethink? I don't. Like, I would recommend that you rethink. Anyway, yes, that quiet question. Would you like to rethink this? Yes, I would. Anyway, but you know, I think it's beautiful as is, and we are out of. They're going to come say goodbye to us. Oh, it's just I love this book so much. I say one more time, and it's been so nice to talk to you.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes, very much congratulations. It's always awkward when I come back and say, hey, it's me again. But thank you so much for this conversation. Nathan, thank you for your I thought those were really thoughtful craft questions that we don't always get in these kinds of events. So I really appreciate that. Please.
Thank you. You knew I was needy just from watching.
No, I loved it because I had a lot of those same questions. And also, Jonathan Franzen has won the Bad Sex Writing Award. So, yeah. But again, everyone who's still on the call, you can buy the book by clicking the button at the bottom of the screen. I really implore you to do so. It is beautifully written, lovely. I really congratulate you on this book. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you,
oh, what a joy. I look forward to meeting in person one day. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye.
Right,
Thanks
bye.
for having me.